can't remember that line of code in front of the interviewer, want to code your machine learning without constantly needing to copy and paste syntax from Google? If you feel challenged by these issues, this video may be for you. I will present a powerful technique that lets my cat and many other elements help me remember code without stressing. I'll walk through a method to easily remember code from Python package pandas. This is a popular method used in many memory championships and other famous events. For example, Dominic O'Brien made a mark in the Guinness Book of Records when he successfully memorized and recalled a random sequence of 2,808 playing cards. That is 54 packs of cards, and he looked at each card only once. Most ordinary people can recall only a tiny fraction of that many sequences. Similarly, in the 2023 video game Alan Wake 2, FBI agent Saga Anderson, I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly, she applies an adapted version called the Mind Place throughout the story to go over her cases and related evidence. Now, this technique has been used by the ancient Greek, and its mechanisms that lets memories stick in our brain are seen in modern scientific studies. You can jump to this section if you want to skip the introduction to the memory method and go directly to the implementation, but I recommend you go through the entire video, even though it is a slightly long one, because I cover a lot of useful tips and technique. How many functions in this library do I need to keep track of? Now, I wouldn't worry about remembering how many functions there are in this library. Instead, what I would do is I would create a video story. That video story would relate to something I'm vividly familiar with. It could be a train journey I took from my hometown or a favorite place where I used to spend time with friends at the university, or an everyday routine like picking up my car keys from my home and heading out in my car from the garage every morning. Or it could be a favorite food or a treat like ice cream. Now, coming back to the Python library I'm creating this video story for. This video story would have the same number of parts or chapters as there are functions in that library. I will also arrange the chapters of my video story in a way that it pulls them together to tell that story, much like how an author arranges chapters in his or her book to tell a story. This technique I'm describing has three key things. First, an object, that is the thing that you're trying to remember. In this case, it is the Python package or library of functions. Second, a really clear, vivid imagery that you create for that object. In our case, it is the video story. And third, a path along which you place that object. In our case, that path is the sequence in which we will arrange the chapters in our video story. This is the memory palace technique. We will leverage these three key elements of memory palace technique in our video story, and the nice effect of this process will be to help us learn and memorize that Python package in real time. Normally, you would first go through a tutorial to familiarize yourself with that package. The problem arises when it comes to remembering all the functions of that package. In this case, there are 9 or 10 different functions of that package. And that package is pandas. But when we leverage the memory palace technique, you will ideally see a huge improvement in how you remember these functions and the syntax to use them in your code. So let's go for it. The first thing to do with any Python package is to import that package to our program. The syntax to import pandas library is import pandas as PD. Let's write that in a table. I'm using Google Sheets, but feel free to use anything that works for you, like an Excel sheet or a notepad. The first column is the ID or a serial number that keeps a count of lines of code for using our package. In this case, we're using the example of pandas. The second column is the actual syntax or the line of code, that specific line of code that we want to remember. The third column is a short description for what that line of code is doing. And the fourth column is for the imagery. The fifth column is for the path in our memory palace. The fourth column, the visual imagery and path, which is the fifth column, are going to be our next focus. I'll begin by creating a video that relates something to the word pandas and a journey through a location or a path. Now, what is the path here? It's a journey through a place that you lived in. Your home is really a good example because often people are able to easily remember a location that they are associated with. So for path, I chose a train journey I often used to take from my hometown to the pristine hills and green fields just outside the valley of my hometown, because that journey is still so vivid in my memory. But you can really pick up any location and path that you can easily recall for your story. It doesn't have to be my story. Now comes an important thing: the actual imagery that is associated with that journey. In my example, it is the train journey and the various images it would bring up in my memory. So what are those visual images from my train journey that I can associate with the code import pandas as PD? Those images will be placed at a particular point in my journey, like a chapter in my story. For the very first line of code, that is import pandas as PD, those images will have an ID of 1 in our table here. Now, for the images, I would start off my story like this. I'm at the railway station and it is about 9 p.m. on the station clock. I ordered some noodles from a local restaurant called Panda. A uniformed food delivery man imports, that is, delivers my box of noodles to me on board the train prior to my departure. The food delivery, that is export of the noodle box, is prior to departure, which helps me to remember the keyword PD, or prior to departure. So you can see how we can start to associate the visual imagery of keywords import pandas PD with the actual line of code we're trying to remember. So what I've done is I have done this for each and every single line of code for the pandas package that we want to try to remember. I've written detailed imagery for each line of code. Once we have gone through this story and shared the video imagery for each line of code, ideally we will associate the imagery with each line of code, which will help us better remember that piece of code. And then we will pause and take a test to see how much of this we remember and can recall. I want you to comment your results in the comment box below. Okay, so let's get this thing going. I want you to imagine the video story so far. You arrive at the station, order some noodles from Panda's restaurant. A uniformed delivery man imports or hands over to you your box of noodles, and all of this happens prior to the departure of the train. The train departs soon afterwards. And in chapter 2, as you enjoy your cold coffee after that hearty noodle dish, you get a pop-up notification from your phone. It's the food ordering app. You open the app to read a CSV file. Oh, it's the bill for the food you just ate. And a gentle reminder to tip the delivery man. You already paid for the food bill before, and thankfully, you can still tip the delivery man through the app. As the night rolls on, you decide to retire for the day to your comfy sleeper berth on the train. Your early morning slumber is interrupted by another beep on your phone. This time, it is the speed app. Your train has been running all night with the hardworking locomotive hauling it up that hilly terrain. As you check the speed of the train on your app, it suddenly starts to feel dark outside your window. You gaze at the door. The indistinct sounds of the wheels are reflecting off of what looks like a concrete wall. It's unmistakable. The train has just entered a tunnel. You know this tunnel by heart from the innumerable journeys you made here with friends. You remember that there is a sharp curve right after the tunnel. There, the engine at the head of the train reveals itself to your camera as the train leaves the tunnel and enters that curve. You're thrilled at the sight. Before long, you're departing one of the most scenic stations on the route. You aim your camera towards the rear of the train, hoping to catch a glimpse of its tail. Because the train is heading down a straight piece of track, you cannot see its tail. You know that though, the tail will reveal itself when the train is negotiating a curve. So to know when the next curve section is coming up, you open and read up an article on the internet that describes the history and details of this rail route. The article informs you that there are different types of bridges and tunnels that were built to make rail travel possible in this difficult, hilly terrain. You're amazed to know that this route has many unique types of bridges, including viaducts and pier bridges. Meanwhile, clouds have gathered and it has started to rain. You read in the article about the unpredictable weather, especially drizzles along this stretch. As the rain picks up, it begins to feel much cooler. And you remember Minicon, your cat Minicon, that always retreats to that cozy corner in your house when it rains. It is almost midday, and looking out the window, you see a change in the landscape, with mountains and hills giving way to trees and lush fields. "Hey, I made it through the hills and I'm back into the plains," you exclaim. The sight of trees and fields tells you that you have left the hills, and last night the sight of tunnels reminded you of towering hills. A question pops into your head though. If you began to write a book, how many sights and sounds of this journey could you group by hills and plains? So, that's the whole story, where we link vivid imagery with a location and set the flow of the story through a path. You kind of get the idea. We associate each chapter in our table that has this vivid imagery to a line of code related to pandas Python package in our example. Now, I want you to pause this video and try to remember all the lines of code, but try to remember the video story I just told you. Try to remember the video imagery from the video and remember its association with a particular line of code. So, how was it? Do share your results in the comments below. I'd absolutely love to know if you were able to use this technique and the story, or if you came up with your own story to help remember coding for the pandas package better. So here's a quick recap of what we did so far. We associated some vivid imagery with a particular line of code and placed that imagery in a particular location. We did this for every line of code in pandas package in a logical order, that is, organized the imagery like chapters of a book in our table. We gave each chapter an ID and let our story flow in that order, along a familiar path. You can really make this as elaborate as you like and make as rich as you like the vivid imagery that you want to associate with the lines of code. it is really up to you to decide how far you want to extend your story to make it really complete for a given topic. This is the path I take for my own machine learning, and this technique has helped me learn data science and learn coding, Python packages like SciPy, NumPy, pandas, matplotlib. The possibilities with this are endless, and there is always scope for improvement. Now, how do I ensure that I can retain the associations I make between vivid imagery and lines of code and not forget them over time? In the first 2 weeks that I learned that memory palace, every day before going to bed, I will try to remember that story, following its path in as much detail as possible, and try to remember the lines of code I associated with a given set of imagery and path and location in my story. I'll make revisions for the story if I feel that the story needs some more details to the imagery in order for me to remember that code. And again, I'd love for you to use this technique and let me know in your comments if this actually works for you to help remember lines of code. So hopefully by utilizing this technique, it helps you speed up learning for machine learning, data science, deep learning, or anything for that matter that you want to learn in your practice and career. The table that I used for the memory path linked in the description below, so go ahead, try them and let me know how this goes. I studied the memory palace technique from various links on Wikipedia and posted what I personally thought was the best of at least 3 different stories I wrote to memorize pandas Python package. The table I used in this video is something I first studied from Nicholas Renaud's YouTube video on a similar technique. I find that his table structure makes sense for my story technique too. Thank you so much for being here, and hopefully you liked my presentation. If you did, be sure to hit subscribe, give that video a like, and share it with your friends. I'd love to hear what other concepts you want covered using the technique of memory palace and memory path. See you in another video.